The topic that I chose for my conflict research was culture. And I chose this topic because I think that the culture of different countries is really interesting and I like to compare them to like my own culture and stuff. So yeah. So the information that I found in the text for the culture of the Sudanese people was that they had big families. Wealth was measured by how many cows you had. And if you were wealthy, then it was like you had over 150 cattle heads. And they have many wives. And there are certain quotes like, "We slept in small, muddled huts thatched with grasses, and each family member had daily chores. Boys didn't stay at home very much as opposed to girls, and the houses were surrounded by grass. Boys were circumcised when they were at young ages, and they had celebrations when the boys were circumcised. Each wife had their own family area, and the houses were built apart from each other with crops in between." And the boys described it as, "Our Dinkaland had vast green grasses and trees dotted everywhere. Year went to school at a university that was a 5-day walk from Jewel, and it was called Wahoo, but there wasn't any school in Jewel for the boys to attend. In Dinka tradition, it was important that the children were together. So like during dinners, they would all go to one house and eat dinner. When the Arabs invaded and spread Islam throughout the country, when it moved south to Dinka and Nuer, they didn't convert because they were too busy of people to find time to pray 5 times a day. Every Dinka boy and girl looked forward to becoming a teenager and going to live in the cattle camp, and that was like college for the Dinka people. And if a boy wanted to talk to a girl before they went off to cattle camp, they had to communicate their messages to the girl through the girl's younger brother. So many young men and girls stayed at the cattle camp until they were married, which is really surprising, and that's how it like shows you that it's like college in America. And although men were allowed to, okay, this is a really weird one. The tradition in Dinka was that they had to remove their teeth to distinguish themselves from like other tribes, and and the men were allowed to keep their teeth, but it wasn't attractive to the girls. And if a girl had her 6 lower front teeth, she couldn't marry a wealthy man because it showed that she wasn't like wealthy. So I compared and contrasted education of men and women in Sudan versus men and women in America. And I found that men in Sudan are not very well educated, and education is free from ages 6 to 13 there. But Sudan only has 19 universities, like colleges, for them to attend. And the literacy rate for males isn't that low, it's 79%. But men in America have a literacy rate of 99%. And most men in America are really well educated, and schooling is both private and public here. And we have free education from ages 4 to 18 with over 3,000 universities for men and women to attend. Women in Sudan are barely educated because they're seen as less than men. And the literacy rate of women in Sudan barely like pushes 60. But in the United States, women are treated just as equally as men, and there's a 0% gender difference with the women's literacy rate at 99%. Current events in Sudan is the civil war in South Sudan. South Sudan is one of the youngest nations in the world, and it's starting to fall apart. And it's one of the most terrible wars that's going on the planet right now because there appears to be no end in sight, and both sides are very committed to a military and violent solution. Christian women have been executed and burned alive, and many of them were gang raped, and 172 women were recently kidnapped, and 79 of them were sexually abused, and nearly all of the women were brutally tortured. And this war seems impossible and one of the worst ones that they've ever experienced, and it's only being solved with violence. And these are my citations.